There is a date circled on the Vatican calendar that almost no one outside its walls has noticed yet. Exactly 2 months remain before it arrives. From October 7th to October 14th, bishops from across the entire world will gather in Rome. Inside that room, family and marriage will be the subject of discussion for 8 consecutive days, and every single word spoken there will be weighed with genuine care. But the single most uncomfortable sentence connected to this entire gathering has already been spoken weeks in advance, and not in Rome. It was spoken in a church in Wisconsin, in front of a group of married couples, 19 days after the Vatican had already circulated its own preparatory document for the October meeting. On July 25th, the feast of St. James the Greater, Cardinal Raymond Burke ascended the altar of the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse. Before him sat couples who had just concluded a retreat specifically dedicated to marriage. And in that setting, he delivered a sentence that reads, on its surface, like a simple definition, but that functions, once examined carefully, as a genuine and deliberate position taken on the exact question the October gathering will spend 8 days discussing. The grace of holy matrimony, he said, is not an ideal to which only a few can aspire. The Cardinal paused deliberately on that specific word, ideal, and then inverted it entirely. He completed the thought. It is, rather, an objective reality, a supernatural gift that leads husband and wife to seek their mutual eternal salvation along the path of divine love. He did not stop there. He closed his homily by asking the faithful gathered before him to prepare themselves, if not for the red martyrdom of actual bloodshed, then certainly for the white martyrdom of faithful witness to the Lord. Faithful witness in the face of what, specifically? His words were precise and deliberately chosen. In the face of indifference, of ridicule, and of persecution. 3 words selected one by one, in careful and deliberate sequence, not a vague devotional formula offered in passing. To understand why that specific homily has generated echoes reaching across the ocean and into the heart of the current Vatican conversation about the family, it is necessary to open the document whose 10th anniversary will be formally observed at that very October gathering. It is called Amoris Laetitia. Pope Francis promulgated it on March 19, 2016, at the conclusion of 3 years of synodal work, including 2 full General Assemblies of bishops specifically dedicated to the family, one extraordinary and one ordinary. That same document also uses the word ideal, and uses it frequently and almost always in a critical sense. But the actual target of that criticism is not necessarily what many people assume it to be. In paragraph 36, Francis conducts what amounts to a collective examination of conscience. He writes that at times, the Church has presented a theological ideal of marriage that was too abstract, almost artificially constructed, and he adds that this ideal was far removed from the concrete situations and actual possibilities of real families as they actually exist. The subject of that specific criticism is us, the pastors themselves, not the sacrament of marriage. The conclusion of that paragraph is stated plainly and without ambiguity. This excessive idealization, Francis writes, did not make marriage more desirable and appealing, but rather quite the opposite. In paragraph 57, he returns to the same point, this time through a specific image. From the Synod, he writes, "There emerges not a stereotype of the ideal family, but rather a challenging mosaic made up of many different realities. Those who defend that text read it in this specific way. No one is lowering the bar, they argue. The Church is simply ceasing to describe families as though they were all uniformly perfect. This is presented as a pastoral argument rather than a doctrinal one, and it carries with it a genuine element of pastoral reality that every parish priest recognizes from direct experience. Families who cannot see themselves reflected in an unreachable ideal often simply stop trying altogether, and those who drift away from the Church rarely find their way back afterward. On July 6th, the Dicastery for the Laity and the Secretariat of the Synod jointly published the thematic structure for the October gathering. 5 specific areas, all of them built explicitly around the practice of listening to families directly. Young people and the discovery of the vocation to marriage. The first years of married life, described in the document as a decisive period, and the accompaniment of families in what the document calls complex situations, framed within an explicitly pastoral structure throughout. Now place all of this directly alongside Cardinal Burke's July 25th sentence. The Cardinal does not deny that wounded families genuinely exist, and he does not speak at all about models or stereotypes in the way the preparatory document does. He speaks instead about grace. He says that marriage is not a destination toward which spouses are still walking, but rather something they have already fully received on the very day they were married. Not a finish line still to be reached, but a starting point already fully given. The difference between these two framings appears subtle on the surface, and it is anything but subtle in its actual implications. If marriage is fundamentally an ideal, then those who have not yet reached it remain somewhere still on the journey toward it. If marriage is instead fundamentally a gift already received, then the couple already possesses everything essential from the moment the sacrament is celebrated. There is then a second element within Burke's homily, the one that has since traveled rapidly across Catholic websites and commentary. Burke does not simply ask the faithful to defend a particular theological position. He asks them to prepare themselves to pay a real cost for holding it. White martyrdom is not a vague metaphor, and it is not a recent theological invention. Within the Church's own long tradition, it refers specifically to those who remain faithful without actually dying for that faithfulness, paying instead, through isolation and social marginalization, what others across history have paid with their actual blood. And the 3 specific words he chose to describe what faithful spouses should expect to encounter are not generic or interchangeable. Indifference, ridicule, persecution, arranged notably in that specific order, moving from the most common and everyday experience toward the rarest and most severe. The homily fell, not by coincidence, on the feast of St. James the Greater, the very first of the apostles to be put to death for his faith. The Cardinal built his entire homily around that specific liturgical date. He asked those present to take up their spiritual practices again with renewed enthusiasm and renewed energy, and to do so specifically for the transformation of the world through the sacrament of marriage itself. The family, he added, is the incomparable fruit of that sacrament, not simply one pastoral area among many others to be assisted from a comfortable institutional distance, but the concrete instrument through which the world itself is actually transformed. The reversal of perspective here, compared to the framing found in the October preparatory document, is total and complete. Placed directly side by side, these two positions reveal something genuinely curious about the entire debate. Both of them treat the word ideal as a genuine problem requiring correction. But they arrive at that shared conclusion for exactly opposite reasons. For the 2016 text, the ideal in question is pitched too high. It describes families that do not actually exist in reality, and in doing so it discourages the real families who do exist and who fall short of that unreachable standard. The proposed solution, in this framework, is to lower our collective gaze toward concrete reality as it actually is. For the Cardinal, the ideal in question is pitched too low. Reducing something that is actually a gift already given into a mere destination still to be reached, he argues, strips spouses of the grace they already genuinely possess from the moment of their marriage. The proposed solution, in his framework, is to raise our collective gaze rather than lower it. Two entirely opposite diagnoses, both beginning from the exact same word, and this is not merely a dispute over vocabulary or semantic preference. In October, inside that room, a genuine choice will effectively have to be made about which of these two diagnoses will guide the Church's pastoral approach to family life for the coming decade. It needs to be stated with real precision here, because the distinction genuinely matters for understanding what is actually at stake. The October gathering is not formally a full assembly of the Synod of Bishops. The Vatican itself makes this explicit in its own preparatory document. It will, however, be conducted in a fully synodal style, structured around listening, prayer, and communal discernment, and the bishops attending are expected, upon their return home, to formally renew their pastoral commitment to families within their own local dioceses. At the extraordinary consistory held on June 27th, the Pope announced that several families would also be brought to Rome, specifically to share their own lived experience directly with the assembled bishops. Their presence, he said, is essential. And he added a sentence that neither side of this current disagreement actually disputes. Where the family is wounded or isolated, he said, the whole of society bears the consequences. On that specific point, there is genuine agreement across the wider Catholic spectrum. Families in crisis represent a real and serious problem, and their wounds ripple outward to affect the broader life of society as a whole. No one credible on either side of this debate denies that basic premise. The disagreement begins precisely at the question of the cure, of what the actual pastoral remedy for that widespread crisis of the family should look like in practice. One side believes families are being lost, specifically because the Church has, across recent decades, asked too much of them, presenting standards so demanding and so removed from lived reality that ordinary struggling families simply give up before they even attempt to meet them. The other side believes families are being lost for the essentially opposite reason, because the Church has asked too little of them, failing across the same recent decades to communicate with sufficient clarity and conviction the full weight, the full dignity, and the full supernatural grace that the sacrament of marriage genuinely confers upon those who receive it. Anyone who reads Amoris Laetitia carefully and from within a sympathetic theological framework will rightly object that the document never once explicitly denies the grace of the sacrament itself, and this specific objection deserves to be acknowledged honestly rather than dismissed. Paragraph 36 is addressing a question of pastoral communication and catechetical approach, not directly proposing a change to sacramental theology in any formal or explicit sense. That distinction is real, and defenders of the document are correct to insist on it. But those standing with Cardinal Burke on this question will respond, with equal seriousness, that a specific manner of communicating a doctrine, repeated consistently across an entire decade and reinforced in parish after parish throughout the world, inevitably becomes, in practice, a kind of theology of its own, regardless of what remains technically true in the original document's careful footnotes and qualifications. If pastors have spent 10 years emphasizing primarily human brokenness, pastoral accompaniment, and the risks of an unreachable ideal, while comparatively rarely emphasizing the objective supernatural grace already given to every validly married couple from the moment of their wedding vows, then the practical theological formation actually received by an entire generation of Catholic families may differ substantially from what the original 2016 document, read in isolation and with full theological precision, technically and narrowly intended to convey. This too is a serious argument, made in good faith, and it deserves genuine consideration rather than dismissal as mere reactionary suspicion. What makes Cardinal Burke's July 25th homily so genuinely significant within this broader unfolding controversy is not primarily its specific theological content, substantial and carefully constructed, though that content clearly is. It is the deliberate timing of its delivery, arriving just 19 days after the Vatican's own preparatory document had already been formally published and its 5 thematic tracks for the October gathering had already been set in place. Burke was not responding to an abstract or hypothetical concern floating somewhere in the general Catholic conversation. He was responding directly, point by point, to a specific and already published document, one that had already begun actively shaping how bishops around the world were preparing to approach this specific October meeting. And his chosen response was not primarily canonical or bureaucratic in character, though he remains, as this channel has documented extensively in recent months, one of the Church's most highly regarded and technically precise living canonists. His response instead took the form of a homily, delivered directly to actual married couples who had just completed a retreat, specifically dedicated to strengthening their own marriages, on the specific feast day of the first apostle ever martyred for the Christian faith. This was a deliberate and carefully constructed pastoral intervention, aimed directly at real families rather than at abstract theological argumentation, conducted at a comfortable distance from actual lived experience. And this specific character of his intervention deserves to be weighed carefully alongside its substantive theological content. The warning about white martyrdom deserves particular and sustained attention here, because it represents something considerably more serious and more consequential than a simple rhetorical flourish deployed for dramatic homiletic effect. Burke is telling faithful married couples directly and without any softening that holding fast to the traditional Catholic understanding of marriage as an objective supernatural gift rather than as a distant and largely unreachable ideal may well cost them something genuinely real in the specific cultural and ecclesial moment the Church currently finds herself in. Indifference from a surrounding secular culture that increasingly regards lifelong, faithful, and fruitful marriage as a quaint and largely optional lifestyle choice among many equally valid others. Ridicule from those, potentially including voices within the Church herself, who might regard an insistence on marriage as already fully graced, rather than as an ongoing pastoral project, still perpetually in progress, as a form of rigid and pastorally insensitive triumphalism disconnected from lived reality. And in more severe cases, genuine social and even ecclesial persecution for holding firmly to a position that increasingly runs directly against the grain of the wider surrounding culture. This is language of considerable weight, and it deserves to be taken with the seriousness it demands, rather than dismissed as merely alarmist or excessively dramatic rhetoric. Cardinal Burke has spent decades as a canonist and a churchman known consistently for measuring his words with real precision and genuine theological care. His decision to invoke the specific and historically loaded language of martyrdom, even in its white and non-lethal form, in connection with the ordinary Catholic sacrament of marriage, represents a considered and deliberate theological judgment about where he genuinely believes the Church's internal conversation on this specific subject is actually heading, and about what he believes will be required of ordinary faithful Catholic couples who continue to hold to the fullness of traditional Catholic teaching on marriage, as that teaching has been understood and consistently taught across many centuries. The October gathering, then, arrives already carrying the weight of this specific and unresolved tension. Whether the assembled bishops themselves choose to name it openly and directly during their 8 days of discussion or not. On one side stands a preparatory document built explicitly around the practice of listening closely to families in complex and difficult situations, built around the specific pastoral concern that an unreachable and overly abstract ideal has historically discouraged rather than genuinely strengthened real families as they actually exist and struggle in the world. On the other side stands a cardinal who has publicly and deliberately reframed the entire underlying question, insisting that the actual pastoral failure of recent decades runs in precisely the opposite direction, that couples have been systematically undersold the genuine supernatural grace that is already objectively theirs from the moment of their wedding, and that recovering a proper and full confidence in that already given grace, rather than continuing to treat marriage as a perpetually distant aspiration still to be gradually achieved through years of pastoral accompaniment, is the actual and more urgent pastoral task genuinely facing the Church at this specific moment in her history. Both diagnoses claim, with apparent sincerity, to be genuinely oriented toward the authentic good of real families. Both explicitly acknowledge, without significant dispute between them, that many families today are genuinely wounded, genuinely struggling, and often genuinely isolated from full and active participation in the ordinary sacramental life of the Church. Where they diverge sharply and consequentially is in their proposed remedy for that widely shared and mutually acknowledged diagnosis. Lower the perceived height of the ideal so that struggling families no longer feel excluded or condemned by an unreachable standard set before them. Or raise the perceived floor of what every couple already objectively possesses from their wedding day forward, so that struggling families come to genuinely understand and internalize that the grace required to overcome their specific difficulties has, in fact, already been fully and objectively given to them in the sacrament itself, requiring only to be more consciously recognized, more deliberately received, and more fully and cooperatively lived out in practice. That circled date on the Vatican calendar now carries a shadow directly over it that did not exist in quite the same way before Cardinal Burke's July 25th homily was delivered and subsequently began circulating widely across Catholic media and commentary. From October 7th through October 14th, family life will be the explicit subject of discussion for 8 consecutive days, conducted directly in the presence of the Pope himself and of the specific families who have been personally invited to share their own lived experience with the assembled bishops. Whether the assembled bishops ultimately choose the framework of the 2016 preparatory document, built around pastoral accompaniment and a deliberate lowering of an allegedly unreachable theological ideal, or whether they choose instead something considerably closer to Cardinal Burke's own framework, built around the objective and already fully given grace of the sacrament, and a corresponding call to genuine and potentially costly fidelity, even in the face of indifference, ridicule, or outright persecution, will shape how ordinary Catholic marriages and families are actually pastored, formed, and accompanied for a full decade to come. Extending well beyond the 8 formal days of discussion, the gathering itself will actually occupy on the Vatican's own calendar. The faithful watching this unfold from outside the walls of that specific meeting room deserve, at minimum, an honest and clear-eyed account of what is genuinely at stake in this discussion, rather than a comfortable and premature assumption that this represents a settled question with an obvious and uncontroversial answer already firmly in hand. It is not settled. 2 serious and substantially different diagnoses of the same underlying pastoral problem, arrived at by serious and sincere churchmen operating fully in good faith, are currently and simultaneously in genuine circulation within the Church, and October will very likely reveal, with considerably more clarity than currently exists, which of these 2 diagnoses this specific pontificate ultimately intends to formally and pastorally endorse as she moves forward. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.